This is Statement Piece, the podcast.
My name's Sita.
And my name's Sophie.
Welcome to the new era of the podcast, where we talk about everything from nepo babies to middle school fashion nightmares.
Stay tuned. And today we're going to be talking about nepo babies.
Right, okay. So where did nepo baby even come from? Actually, let's start with the definition.
Yeah. What is a nepo baby?
Please tell me, what is a nepo baby?
So a nepo baby it's been popularized recently as any child who benefits basically from their parents. A baby, a kid who benefits from nepotism. Usually it's talked about in entertainment circles, more recently people who follow in their parents' footsteps, like actors' children who then also become actors. But it can get a little bit more complicated and definitely has much larger implications than just in the entertainment industry.
Definitely. So today we're going to do a lot of reference to just the nepo baby conversation, talk about some of the history, why it's so debated, and some of our top and bottom 3 nepo babies. We're also going to be referencing New York Magazine, which brings up a good point of where this whole conversation even started. So basically in February, there was this Canadian worker named Miriam Daraji who tweeted about how she didn't realize that the person who played Lexi in Euphoria, who is Maud Apatow, is the child of Judd Apatow and Leslie Mann. And even though it was only retweeted 4,000 times, it has over 2,500 plus quote tweets. So it reached a lot of different people, and that kind of started all of these mass media coverage on any nepo baby.
You know, in that article that you're talking about, it's more than just an article, it's really a spread. It's like there's a very intense breakdown of the different kinds of nepo babies, sort of the different tiers of nepo babies, the different manifestations of nepo babies, like nepo babies who are maybe related to someone in the industry, maybe not necessarily a famous person, and then nepo babies who might have gone into different careers than their parents, but you know, in the entertainment world, that would be like a singer who was the child of a famous actress, but they're
or even there were
related.
some cases where it was the accountant of a famous band.
Yeah.
Or the person who designed the Rolling Stones logo.
Yeah.
Like, all of these things, like, once you get to know kind of the intricacies of it, you understand, like, I guess, oh, you should just meet someone, like, meet my friend, or you should do this. Even just having that knowledge of what actually happens in the industry and kind of the inside scoop can really go far.
One of the big breaching points of the nepo baby argument is that it started to kind of reach the actual nepo babies. Like, nepo babies started to be asked about it, and I think that their responses sort of, you know, didn't do anything to, like, quell the conversation, because I think one of the big frustrations with nepo babies is that they don't really acknowledge their nepotism. They try to emphasize that they still work hard or downplay the role that their parent or their connections have. But I think that to a lot of other people, they see that as like disingenuous, and I think that you know, rubs people the wrong way. And then
you have people like Hailey Bieber, who wore a nepo baby t-shirt and is almost making light of the whole situation, which I think can also go either way. But at least she's acknowledging it.
At least she is, yeah. With nepo babies and the concept of nepo babies, it's not actually like that new of a thing, this idea. You know, we have like there's been a lot of talk about the monarchy, for instance, right? Recently with like Spare and the Harry and Meghan docuseries, like that is an entire institution that is built on nepotism. And obviously you have a lot of, you know, because we're a fashion podcast, there's a lot of famous fashion moments that come out of, you know, the monarchy, like notably Diana was, you know, a huge thing. Everyone, when Meghan and Kate both had each of their respective weddings, everyone was like, the big question is who's going to design the dress, what's the dress going to look like. So there's you know, more than just in the monarchy, obviously there's like a huge integration of like nepotism in fashion. And I think we're also going to dive in a little bit deeper into kind of the real history of fashion and its relationship to nepotism.
Stay tuned.
We're gonna start off with talking about sort of, you know, the origins of nepotism and this idea, and basically how it intersects with class, because that's one of the things that I was thinking about is like, what's really at the root of this? It's ideas about class and that there are different classes of people. If you think about fashion and the history of fashion, it was almost always geared, especially like haute couture, was geared towards elite. You know, for instance, when the first kind of haute couture house, or the creator of haute couture, Charles Frederick Worth, who lived from 1825 to 1895, he created House of Worth. That was, you know, his couture house. He got big because the president of France, Napoleon III, notably nephew of Napoleon I, he married Princess Eugenie, who also lived from like 1826 to 1920 and was born into Spanish nobility. Empress Eugenie was really into House of Worth and bought a lot of Charles Frederick Worth's pieces, and, you know, she was kind of like the influencer, right? Like her tastes set the tastes of the court. And so in a huge part, because of her patronage, the House of Worth was able to thrive, and I think it only ended somewhere in the 1950s or mid 20th century. So it had like a really long run, and, you know, this is sort of extended outwards throughout the history of fashion, where, you know, I was listening to the podcast Dressed, A History of Fashion, and it was this episode on this book called How to Read a Dress. And one of the things that the fashion historian who was speaking on that episode noted is that there are actually very few surviving examples of working class garments, especially in museum collections, because, you know, obviously working class people didn't have access to a lot of stuff, so they would wear their clothes until they fell apart. And, you know, really high quality pieces were obviously only worn in a very select group of, you know, of society, which is, you know, nobility, the aristocracy, again, monarchy, all entirely centered around nepotism. Yeah. And for a while, a lot of, you know, I picked three notable like socialites slash fashion influencers kind of their era, who, you know, are all connected by nepotism in three different eras. So, you know, I looked into this guy, Beau Brummel, who essentially created modern menswear more as an influencer than a designer. He was the one who was like, you shouldn't dress ostentatiously, you should dress like plainly and simply, and basically is the reason why men only wear suits now. Wow. But what's interesting about him is he was, his father, William, was a private secretary to a member of the British Parliament from, you know, this was in like the 18th, and I think Beau lived into the 19th century, but, you know, and he enjoyed like a middle class lifestyle, but he did, after his father passed, inherit a fortune of like multiple millions. So it was interesting because he did try to climb the ranks of society. He befriended the king, but it's kind of a classic example, even in olden times, of like, almost I think about it with like Miley and Billy Ray Cyrus. You know, because like Miley, I feel like now has eclipsed her dad in terms of like who's more famous, but it's like she used almost like Billy Ray, because they were obviously hired together on Hannah Montana.
Well, did you know Miley was actually hired first?
Really?
And then Billy Ray afterwards.
Yeah. But I feel like there must have been like, you know,
of course,
some kind of like
the fact that he was already known in the industry, also a musician, like, and I think it also tied in like the demographic that was watching Hannah Montana. It was their parents who were fans of Billy Ray Cyrus. So you almost got a wider audience.
And it like definitely tied in. So it's kind of like, I guess it's an instance of like using a lower nepotism connection as like a stepping stone, and then building your own wild fame in part off of like
also known as social climbing.
But that's the thing, is that nepotism isn't just nepotism, it's also like a big elevation for social climbing. The other ones, and I'll go through these, I'll try to be quick about these, was Caroline Schermerhorn Astor, who's obviously Astor's Astor Place, robber barons.
Wow.
Like, you know, again, a kind of like not a monarchy, but like an American dynasty that's still like, there's a lot of name recognition for Astors today. And she bought these Parisian gowns, but at this time when the U.S. government was trying to like get people to buy more foreign goods, so they put basically these huge taxes on these dresses, and she refused to pay the taxes, and I think the dresses were ultimately auctioned off. Like, she never even got a chance to get the dresses. But it was kind of a whole ordeal. She was such a trendsetter that a bunch of women started to copy her, and like started trying to order French products and avoid paying the tariffs and the taxes. They actually had stats where it's like, by the fall of 1892, the quantity of French garments passing through New York Customs appraiser's office could reach up to 1,000 dresses per day.
Wow.
So again, it's like this rich lady who was born of socialites and married rich, obviously, really set this bar. And then more modern equivalent is Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, who exemplified this 60s wave of fashion that was still kind of influenced by the 50s. Obviously, she's most known for being the first lady to John F. Kennedy. Another kind of dynasty in and of itself, but important to note about Jackie Kennedy. Her father was a Wall Street broker and socialite, and then her grandfather was also a French cabinet maker who worked for Joseph Bonaparte, Napoleon's brother. So he was also very well connected, and that goes back to her grandfather was born in 1792. So she was a 20th century icon, but her
those old family ties.
She has really old family ties. And so then that got me thinking, like, well, when did this shift? And in fashion, speaking of the 1960s, there was this shift, a more populist shift from, top-down wearing, like, where, the designers set the trends and then it filters down, to this idea of street style that's now so ubiquitous, where it's like, it's not what are the designers making, it's what are the regular people wearing on the streets, and then that influences.
And I think a lot of that actually has to do with the population of TV and media. Because now suddenly it wasn't just, you were seeing what were in the ads, but you were seeing, like, MTV was really popular. Yeah. And you could see what real people that your age were wearing around the world.
Yeah, no, totally. I think, like, and media and marketing has, like, played such a huge role in, I think, shaping how we relate to class and also how we relate to nepotism and how we relate to fashion. So it all really, like, ties together. And so, that was, like, the first time when it was really just about the consumer was the sort of, like, center of creation. And it also is, there is sort of this arc with America and America's rise to, like, prominence on the international stage, just this changing sense of upward mobility and the possibilities of upward mobility.
The American dream.
The American dream, yeah. For a long time, it's kind of like the son of an aristocrat would become an aristocrat, like the son of a laborer would become a laborer themselves. And so nepotism wasn't just, kind of something to the side. It was like a widespread function of, like, how everyone worked and thought about their lives and their futures.
Yeah, well, I feel like that was true even outside of the United States. Like, if you think about in France, every last name basically related. It was, like, almost exact translation to what your job was. Yeah. Or what your, like, father did. So you would know immediately in the class, like, whose dad did what, like, what their family is known for. And even in India, like, with the caste system. Yeah. Like, it's almost exactly the same, where you inherit almost, like, the societal label and expectations for you, and that's passed down to your children. Yeah, and we're at, like, a really interesting time right now, because there were periods where in America, like, people were able to, rise up in society. There have been studies done that noted the first major period of upward mobility lasted between 1850 and 1920. And then the second major period of upward mobility was just, like, right after World War II. Now, though, we're exporting labor, so there's not as much room and for upward mobility. And there was an Axios article that noted socioeconomic mobility in the U.S. is at its most sluggish in history. The United States, according to the World Economic Forum, recently was ranked 27th in the world for social mobility, and a recent study from research at UPenn and Northwestern, the University of Nebraska, and the Census Bureau, looking back as far as 1850, concluded that socioeconomic mobility in America is at its worst ever. That's so interesting, because you would think everyone now, like the lay person, believes that it's so much higher than it could ever be. There's so much possibility and opportunity. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting to think of that and
fact that the Nepo baby controversy is happening right now. Like, at this time when, you know, it is, you know, I think there's a lot of factors in here, like the American government hasn't raised the minimum wage in a really long time, so much so that what they were advocating, you know, what activists were advocating for before is now like $15 minimum wage, and then they were now like they're saying even that, like with inflation, wouldn't be a livable wage. And I think the pandemic also kind of, you know, just made everything a lot more clear to people how much economic disparity there is, and how hopeless it is to really like raise up in society. And so I think that's kind of an interesting way to think about, like, through fashion, like kind of how did we get here, and I think what are some of the larger things like motivating this discussion right now?
Well, I think a lot of it, like you said, like everything became a lot clearer, like because people are struggling, and I feel like in times of crisis, you know, it's nice to look at, oh, this other realm where it seems really glamorous, like Hollywood seems really glamorous, and fashion seems really glamorous, where people are living extravagant lifestyles, and of course it's easy for everyone else now that they're on such a big public international online stage to critique them.
Absolutely. And I think it's especially difficult, you know, in fashion when it's something that people really do kind of see as now democratized, I think in part because of like the 1960s. Like now we think like anyone can be fashionable, or that
That's true.
You know, I know certain influencers who, you know, have niches and, you know, their own like little audience that they've built up, but they're not, you know, famous. They're not like your Hailey Biebers or your you know, your Kendall Jenners. They are not at that level of fame, but like they got there by having like really interesting, daring, bold style. And like, you know, Doja Cat aside, like there's you know, I saw a fashion critic, I think it was Hot La Mode, Luke Mar, who was talking about how like everyone, you know, is really trying to like look sexy, and when they wear clothing to fashion week, like it's all about still looking pretty and looking cute, and like not a lot of people are just interested in like looking crazy or really like going for it in a way that's risky. And I think it's like people look and they see, why is it that, you know, this Hollywood elite, these nepo babies, these inside the industry people are playing it so safe when there are so many people who are like taking more risks and being actually, you know, inventive with clothing.
Well, I always think about that, especially in terms of fashion, because I think it's hilarious when someone says, oh, I love so-and-so's style. Like, I love their style. Like, they're a style icon to me. I'm like, you mean their stylist is your style icon? Because they are not picking those things out themselves.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, a stylist is working 24/7 to make sure they have all these new looks. They're able to find, like, niche new designers and small businesses to support.
Kind of wrap it up. It also feeds into this whole thing of, like, you know, I've been listening to a lot of those TikToks where people interview...
like people on the street?
People on the street, yeah, and they'll say, like, what's your favorite trend or whatever, and a lot of the times, like, one of the things I've heard constantly is, like, we're over trends. Like, we're, you know, because it's impossible unless you do have a stylist and you can, like, rent clothing or have clothing or just have, like, a huge amount of, like, Kim Kardashian money.
Yeah.
Like, it's hard to get, like, so many different types of clothes so fast because, like, trends are cycling through at, like, a rapid pace. So it's, like, have your own style and and don't just rely on trends.
So I definitely think it depends also geographically, but I do think with Gen Z, it is moving towards less trend-driven and more personal taste.
Yeah, because you still see people doing, like, Shein hauls and whatever, and you still see markets like Shein who, like, you know...
Shein is still the biggest fashion company in the world.
Who, like,
They bring in the most
stuff.
revenue.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think it all relates to class, which I feel like all relates back to the idea of kind of like questioning, you know, this kind of larger system that we have, and why are the people who are famous actually famous, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great way to
end it.
Yeah. Right, so now we're going to get into a little bit of the New York magazine, a little bit about the article, about how this year, as in 2022, because this came out during the last week of 2022, is the year of the Nepo baby. So when I read this article, I was shocked with how many Nepo babies there were. It's almost comical that you think like anyone who's made it far and you believe that they put in the hard work. And I do think with a lot of celebrities, you're going to idealize them. And at the same time, they do have a little bit of a leg up.
Mm-hmm. I know, it feels like it's reached a fever pitch right now. Like, there's just so many Nepo babies. Because, again, as we've discussed, it's not new. But it feels like things have gotten just, like, worse. It was interesting to me, and seeing the discussion about it online, because I'm on Twitter and everyone was, like, dissecting it. How, again, like, how complicated being a Nepo baby could be. Like, there is very kind of straight lines. Cindy Crawford's daughter, Kaia Gerber, Cindy Crawford, supermodel.
Kaia Gerber,
supermodel. Like, that, who also happens to bear, like, a very striking resemblance to Cindy Crawford. And I think, like, those are cases where it's, like, a straight line. Or we're like, oh, Steven Spielberg's daughter is also a director. Right? Like,
straight line.
Yeah, straight line.
For our listeners, there's a page, the opening page to the article, where it's literally half and half of some Nepo babies and their parents. And it's actually quite astonishing how striking the resemblance are for some of these.
Yeah. So then you have, like, industry parents or people where it's like, you know, you had connections, but there's, you know, but and it just becomes a little bit more like, oh, these people are, like, well connected, and it's things start, and like you mentioned, like cousin Greg's on Succession, Nicholas Braun, his dad designed the Rolling Stones logo.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, this feels obviously less like a straight line, but in the magazine, like, I think in some cases I was like, okay, that's a bit of a stretch, because if someone's like the lighting director of a show, you know, they might not be, it's not like they're billionaires or necessarily, like, how much connections do they actually have?
Really
like, you have to
yeah.
kind of really think about it, you know?
I completely agree. And right before we were even going to record this episode, we kind of had a discussion ourselves on what we felt about this personally. And Sophie asked me, how do I feel about Nepo babies? And I was like, I mean, they were born into it. They had no choice.
Yeah.
Like, so be it. Sure, they have a leg up, but who doesn't in the world? And they can thought this way because it's apparent in every industry, you know, whether it be in law. Like, yes, if two of your parents are lawyers, you're most likely going to be a lawyer because that's what you're surrounded by. You know people who are in this industry. You're exposed to it. So it's almost very familiar, and you know the path to go down. Similarly, as someone who's trying to pursue medicine, you do see a lot of people who have both parents as doctors and their child ends up being a doctor as well. And I know people say it's not the same as you get a leg up, but it is, at least in medicine, just speaking from my experience, like when you're pre-med and you're doing everything you need to, obviously having someone who, like, having access to all of your family friends who happen to be doctors and you can shadow is a huge advantage to someone who may not have that. And so I think with that, I do see a lot of parallels, and I don't know if it should be critiqued as much because it's something you can't really control.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think we were also talking about a real life instance where I knew someone who was also interested in being a journalist. And I'll say, to, you know, preface this, it's not like I do not come from any kind of a place of privilege. Like, my mom does do a little writing, and she is she's working mostly on fiction right now, but like but you know, in a very up until now very modest way, and that has come with obviously some perks. But I was talking to this kid who was kind of bemoaning the lack of job opportunities, and then I realized that both his parents were highly successful, like, columnists at the LA Times, which is, I would say, one kind of strata up from the amount of privilege that I have, in a way, right? In terms of, like, nepotism and direct connection to the industry. And I was like, I just wanted to go back to him and be like, if you have those connections, right? Use those connections. Like, I don't think anyone begrudges people for having connections and then utilizing the connections. It's just admitting to it, right?
I think that's the main thing. That's a very good point, because all of, like, everyone in this article basically, like, yes, they're nepo babies, but no one has really been like, yes, I am, like, I got these advantages through XYZ. And I think, like, that's where you see a lot of issues, just even societally. Like, if you think about the college admission scandal.
Yeah.
That was worldwide news, and that was directly kind of seeing where nepo babies come in hand and having access to these resources, whether it be financially or just through connections, and getting their kids into Ivies and all of these things without them even knowing it sometimes, which is shocking to me. But anyways, but I think that's where you see it come to a point where, okay, that's not the same for everyone.
Yeah.
That's not everyone can actually evade the law and get away with it.
Yeah. Well, I think that also it's something that I find annoying. Like, you talked about how, like, it's, for medical doctors, that's also, like, there's nepotism in that industry, right? But I think, we were also talking about, and I think that it goes back to, like, a lot of the stuff that some of these nepo babies have said. Like, I think Tom Hanks said at one point, like, it's a family business, like, people, like, that's just a family business, just like being a doctor or whatever. Or the fact that, I think Lily Rose Depp said, like, oh yeah, some people are doctors because their parents were doctors or whatever, that this sort of thing happens all the time. But I think one of the discussions that we were kind of having is that, for me, I think that, like, when you are an actor in Hollywood, like, there is a kind of, like, with doctors, I think there's less of a scarcity mindset, right? Like, obviously, there's, like, you have to go to med schools, you have to get certain credentials. At the same time, like, I think we briefly talked about this, like, your dad's not taking the bar for you, like, you have to, like...
Yeah, like, you have to take your board exams, you have to go through the training.
The board, that's what I meant.
Yeah, no, that's okay, the bar in law school.
Yeah, the bar in law school. But, like, you have to actually, like, have some degree of knowledge, and it is standardized.
And aptitude.
And it's standardized in that way. So it's not just like, oh, just because your father's a doctor, you can be a doctor. Whereas I think, speaking of Tom Hanks, like, he has Chet Hanks, who's, like, would, I guarantee you, not be getting the same attention, if he were, like, not Tom Hanks's son. Yeah. And, like, I think there's also then now, like, a scarcity mindset, because only so many people can be big names in Hollywood. And I think, there can only be so many, like, big movies in the year and so many roles. And so I think that also, like, what you kind of run into is when you have nepo babies that are concentrated in one industry, is that, like, then it just becomes like a continual pass of the baton from the old guard.
And this article literally brings that up. The oldest dynasty were the Chaplins, who have ruled for 110 years. And basically it starts with Eugene O'Neill, who was the father of an actress who married Charlie Chaplin. And the actress who married Charlie Chaplin also dated J.D. Salinger. They had a daughter who was an actress. And their granddaughter is a Game of Thrones actress. Yeah. Like, how does that relate from Charlie Chaplin to today?
Yeah, and I think what's difficult about that is, like, if you go back to a lot of, the older films and even films, Hollywood in, like, in the 70s or in the 60s, it's very white, and and it's very much people who like look a certain way, just even, like, very normal, kind of cut from the same cloth kind of beauty standards, right? And I think that if everyone's just inheriting that, if everyone's just inheriting these things, then the industries are just going to be cycling through the same people. And I think I read a quote that talked about how it's the indie little freaks. It's the the people who come in who are not, like, born into the industry, who can reimagine it, like, who bring different perspectives and different identities that can, like, really create change and make things that are exciting. Like, if Hollywood is people, and I think it might be a little bit this already, but if Hollywood's just rich people, then like how are they going to make stories that represent, you know, a larger swath of America than just like the bubble that they're in?
Well, why are there so many reboots?
Yeah.
Like, all of these great stories were kind of made, and now it feels like there's a lack of creation, lack of imagination. And you also have kind of this content overload where it's just a ton of content that's really bad quality.
Yeah.
Just going out so people have something to watch. I mean, you're completely right. But what you said reminded me of this quote, actually, from the article, the New York Magazine article, basically from Fran Lebowitz, who wrote in a 97 issue of Vanity Fair, saying, getting in the door is pretty much the entire game, especially in movie acting, which is, after all, hardly a profession notable for its rigor, which I laughed at that.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And then she brought it up in relation to structural racism. Just as the children of celebrities got a leg up from the fact that they physically resembled people who were already famous, so too did America's whites benefit from fitting the nation's mental image of who should be in charge. In this context, being a nepo baby is the Cadillac of privilege. Nobody's got it better.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, I read that out loud as well when I read it for the first time to Sophie, because I was like, wow, that is very powerful. And I mean, it has such a good point, because initially when we even started this conversation and started talking about even recording an episode about nepo babies, I was like, I don't understand the big deal. I just listened to this interview with Chelsea Handler, and she was saying she didn't really care, and I was like, yeah, like I could see her point. Like, people are born into this, they can't do anything about it. But when you bring up points like these, it is something to be aware of, that not only are we having a lack of representation, but is it pushing the industry in a direction that we want it to be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, again, it's also just like an acknowledgement that it's a systemic problem, right? It's not like people, and I mean, we can maybe discuss this more at length like later, but it's not that people are like, oh, Lily Rose Depp, we hate her, she's the problem, right?
I love her.
Like, you know? But like, it's not like it's about a single person, right? It's like, it's about a system. With fashion in general, though, there's also this sense of, like, and you mentioned reboots, like, there is this sense of nostalgia, there's this sense of, like, people love going, like, oh, you remember, like, Daniel Radcliffe, and then they show a picture of him as, like, a little kid in Harry Potter, like, this is him now.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, Rupert Grint had a baby, and I think people are, like, there's a lot of, you know, publicity to be made off of, like, here is Cindy Crawford posing with her daughter, you know?
Oh, no, it makes huge headlines. Like, I remember Heidi Klum had this photo shoot with her daughter, Lenny, and it was an underwear shoot, and it created so much backlash. It created so much backlash because people were like, this is absurd. I cannot believe that it's a mother and daughter. And it was the first time that Lenny was kind of in a big shoot.
Yeah.
So even that, I think, just amplified the response. But you also see it the New York, back to the New York article. The New York article, the New York Magazine, New York Magazine article brought up how People Magazine had talked about why you should follow Reese Witherspoon's daughter, and one of the reasons was simply because, oh, she takes cute selfies with her mom.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
But it's almost like people love to know more, love to, like, investigate that a little bit more, and we saw that very recently with Apple Paltrow.
Yeah.
She recently just came out as, not just came out, but I guess kind of like a coming out onto a
debutante.
Yeah. Onto the public scene at the Chanel Couture fashion show, looking amazing.
Yeah. Well, what, like, if you're a nepo baby who hasn't at least tried modeling, like, what are you even doing?
The magazine brings that up because the first thing you can do is they all go to modeling. Let me just bring this up. So they reference to this manager who says, it's no surprise so many nepo babies get their start as models. The child doesn't have to open their mouth. I've learned that once they start speaking, the public doesn't go along for the ride. The more they talk, the more unrelatable they come.
Yeah. And I think what's, like, difficult is, you know, like, there was a big thing in the modeling world after Lily Rose Depp, you know, had released a statement, not released a statement, but she was interviewed for some magazine, and she kind of like blew off the nepo baby like label and was kind of like, I don't think that's right. Like, I think I really like worked hard to be where I am. And I believe Vittoria Soretti, who is a top model, she put out a statement that basically talked about how, like, you know, like, you can't, like, nepo models you can't compare yourself to me, because like I had to do, like, because there's so much grunt work, and there's so much, even if you don't get into like the Jeffrey Epstein of it all, and the like, you know, like, there's so much exploitation in the modeling world. Like, you're treated like objects. Like, she was saying that, like, celebrity kids would just like walk past her. There was Kendall Jenner got in hot water for saying, I think it was talking there, I think this might have come up in here, but like saying how picky she is with her shows, like, and what shows she does. And like all like models everywhere were like, you know, we can't all be picky about what show. Like, some of us are like working, and not necessarily, you know, not every model is making millions of dollars, and like we have to pay our rents in expensive cities, and, you know, and go to all these castings, and like, you know, we don't get to live a high life and go back to our NBA player boyfriend, you know?
Yeah. No, Victoria Soretti even brought that up, because she was saying, like, even if you did put in the grunt work, you got to go back to your luxury home, and the quote from her is that you got to sleep on your, like, silk pillowcase.
Yeah. Like, obviously, when you're a model and you're front-facing, your face is your job. So, like, you know, having access to skincare and all
this is everything
this.
on TikTok. It's like, you're not ugly, you're just not rich.
Yeah. You're not ugly, you're just not rich. So these girls also have to like work. I mean, it's like, it's such a kind of like clusterfuck in a way. It's like, and such a game where I don't even know how you can be a model.
So one other part of fashion that is also just nepotism driven is also the business side of things. So LVMH has kind of been a hot topic recently, because I think the chairman or the president, he is looking to, you know, pass down the company to one of his 4 children, and people relate it to Succession. Like, this is the real life Succession, which I think is hilarious. For those of you who don't know, LVMH is a huge luxury brands conglomerate, and anyone who's going to run that will really be dictating a lot of what happens in fashion, both financially but also on the trend side of things. What is going to happen with all these huge fashion brands? And it's just interesting, because I think that also ties into some of the older fashion houses like Gucci or Prada. Like, Prada, the name is still there. Like, the creative director, what's her name?
Miuccia Prada.
Miuccia
Prada. You have to say it with the accent.
Excuse me. But yeah, you know, like, you're still seeing the family members. It is the family business.
Like Donatella.
Exactly, Versace. Yeah. So even though we see it in entertainment and models and almost, I feel like, fixtures and kind of the front-facing, kind of what you said, the front-facing figures to a lot of these companies and brands, it's also on the inside too.
And it makes sense, because it's all like, so many of these businesses like Gucci and like, you know, even House of Worth, the original haute couture, was taken over by that guy's sons, and that's how the brand continued.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good place to pause. It's definitely, I think we could talk about this topic for hours.
Yeah.
Because there's so many layers to it. But I think we can move on to something a little lighter and brighter.
Yes.
So we thought it would be fun to talk about our top 3 and bottom 3 nepo babies, in our opinions, each. So come back to listen to that. All right, welcome to the top 3 and bottom 3 nepo babies of Statement Piece.
Yep.
Should we start with the bottom and move our way up?
No, I think we should start with the top and work our way down.
Okay.
I think because everyone wants to know who the bottom is.
You're right.
Everyone
That's the
wants to
spicy
know
part.
The shit talking.
Okay, my top are actually kind of tied, and there's really no reason for a lot of these other than the fact that I really like them. Number 1, Zoe Kravitz.
Okay.
beautiful, talented. She's just a cool person, cool vibe. That's all I gotta say.
Nice.
It's really, really low standards over here.
Do you want to go back and forth?
Yeah. Then you go.
Okay. So I'll say mine is Alexander Skarsgård.
Oh.
I think he's one of those people where it's like you remember that he is a Skarsgård, and you remember it more because now his like brother Bill is, you know, in the mix with everything, being Pennywise. But like Alexander Skarsgård, like you don't really, I don't really think about him being a nepo baby. Like I recently, and by recently I mean like in the last like 3 or 4 months, like saw The Northman, which is like a big Viking epic movie, and he like carried that movie, and he can do that, and he can be in Big Little Lies. Like the man is talented.
I love how we both picked someone from Big Little Lies.
Oh yes, and you know what? Laura Dern was one of the other ones I was considering, also a nepo. So that Big Little Lies is kind of nepo baby central, but I think they have picked the higher tier of the nepo babies. All
definitely.
right, what's your next top?
Okay, mine is Dakota Johnson.
Okay, I know her only that she's a Libra, and that we're both Libras, and that she has limes in her house because she's allergic.
Exactly.
And
Which is
that's
hilarious.
not the truth, Ellen. That to me is Dakota Johnson's 3 biggest works.
Yeah, I just love her.
You just love her?
That's all I gotta say. I just like the way she speaks, and her aura gives me good vibes.
The quiet chaos.
Yeah. Like, I feel like that's kind of me.
Yeah. My next one, and this is...
That was a good one.
Yeah, because, like, your dad is Paul McCartney. Like, so many people, if their dad was Paul McCartney, they would just fall apart. Like, how do you follow up with your dad being, like, one of the
so successful
one of the biggest bands of all time. I really do feel like I think of Stella McCartney designer, and then I think of Stella McCartney, Paul McCartney's daughter. Like,
it is very separate, and I think until I grew up, I didn't realize that they were actually related.
I just
thought it was the McCartney name. She's a household name.
Yeah.
She's a leader in vegan leathers.
Yeah,
truly, and she always has been ahead of her time. Really.
Yes, truly.
Okay, my next one. Wow, that was a really good one. I wish I thought about that. Yeah. We thought about these today, and I just thought about the first 3 people that came to mind that I love. Next, Lily Rose Depp.
Okay. What about Lily Rose Depp?
I just like her.
You just like her? Do you like her style? Do you like...
I do like her style. Like, I do like the fact that she was kind of a Chanel ambassador. Like, I think it really fit her vibe very well. Like, it fit her look very well. I'm really interested to see her star in the new show.
The Icon?
Yeah, the Icon. Yeah.
So then mine, I have like 2 kind of like nepo babies to watch because they just stuck in my brain. But this one is also like a very established entertainer, Maya Rudolph. Whose mother was singer Minnie Riperton. And again, I feel like Maya Rudolph, you know, probably also benefits from not having the same last name as her mom. But, you know, she is like, I think she like, you know, she is such, as someone who like who, you know, grew up kind of like watching SNL and, you know, loves Bridesmaids and watches Maya Rudolph's show Loot now, like, and loving like Maya Rudolph and Kristen Wiig. I think like she's one of those people who, if I had, you know, obviously you never know what things would be like in like an alternative universe if, you know, so-and-so didn't have famous parents or so-and-so didn't come from that background. But I really am very positive that in almost any situation, like Maya Rudolph would still have become famous. Like she will always, it's like the internet thing. She will always be famous to me. Like in every universe, Maya Rudolph is like a successful comedian because she's like just that good.
Love that.
Yeah. And then my 2 nepo babies to watch, I was trying to think of like more fashion nepo babies. One, I like Iris Law.
I literally was going to put her down.
Because you know what I like? I like that she shaved her head. And I think if you're going to be a nepo baby, if you're going to have the cushiness, you gotta be a freak. Like weird.
Someone commented that on one of her TikToks saying, you were so uncool before until you shaved your head and now people think you're cool.
Yeah.
Apparently it worked.
Yep, so good. Like, having left
I
her-
really do like her. I also think she's definitely going to be big soon.
Yeah.
Bigger than she already is.
Mm-hmm. The other one I put down is Ella Emhoff. Because she's a fashion student.
Yeah.
And she's, like, a knitwear artist.
Yeah.
And so she has a marketable skill.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that you can't take away from that.
All right.
Okay,
Let's move to the spicy part.
Time for the...
I have two that are tied.
Okay.
And they're related.
Mm-hmm.
Brooklyn Beckham and Nicola Peltz.
I also have Brooklyn Beckham, so we should just talk about that.
I think it is the epitome of what's wrong with nepo babies. Like, they are famous for no reason. They stage a lot of things to make them seem cool, but they just won't be as cool. Like, I feel like if someone's trying too hard, you just won't achieve that because you're trying too hard.
Well, they're trying to be David and Victoria.
And it's not organic. Yeah, but they don't have anything that's themselves. Like, I don't know who they are.
Yeah.
Really.
Or charisma or...
There's nothing.
anything.
There's nothing. Yeah. It just seems really constructed. Not the constructed. It just seems really fabricated.
Like artificial.
Yes, very artificial.
And forced,
yes.
too. Because it's like, you'll have a 7 look, 7 days. Like, there was a 7 look, 7 days video from the two of them. And it's like, I don't think anyone asked for this. You know, no one wanted this.
Yeah, literally.
But, like...
For those of you who don't know, Brooklyn Beckham is one of David and Victoria Beckham's sons, who is kind of known culturally or in pop culture as someone who has really tried so many different careers and really just not hit the nail on the head
with any
of them. And it's really sad. And I will quote one of my friends who said, "Wouldn't it be so embarrassing to be married to Brooklyn Beckham?"
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh, that is a burn," but she's not wrong.
Nicola Peltz is obviously daughter of a billionaire.
Yeah.
But I had Brooklyn Beckham on my list too. I'm like obsessed with. I think like I just feel like I pour a lot of angst into Brooklyn Beckham. Like even just the idea of Brooklyn Beckham, because who knows? Maybe he's like a sweet kind of maybe a little dopey kid that's just grown up rich and like just poor little helpless baby. You know, just can't.
If you're hopeless, you do not need to be on the public stage.
No, I know, but that's the thing is like. But then I think the thing that really like because on the one hand there's two separate things going on here, right? Like I feel like Brooklyn Beckham, you know, it's normal to be like at the age that he's at, which is like early-ish 20s, right? Mm-hmm. And because he didn't go to college, so he didn't have like a lot of some like important milestones where people figure out like who they are, right? To be like to have like a bunch of different career aspirations and kind of bounce between all of them. But I think the issue for me is that he goes to like he wants to go to a 10 with every career that he's doing. Like cool, you want to be a photographer, like go go do the work. You know, go he tried to go to photography school, but that didn't last. And then now, you know, he's being a chef, and there was and getting his own like chef show, even though he was just like when I think you really look into it, what basically happened is he got into cooking during the pandemic like everybody else. And I don't know if you've seen the show The Bear, but it's about like working in a kitchen.
Yes, I have seen it.
And like I like cooking, and there have been times when I've had this very romantic idea of like, oh my god, I would love to be a chef. It's like the frustrating thing is that, you know, he'll do that, and then he won't do any of like the hard stuff that earns you like the cred, right? And that earns you like the ability to like have for people to respect you, like. And
I think even if he does, that's not what's publicized, and I think that's almost what the issue is. Like with photography, right? Like if you're learning photography, great. Like if you're testing it out, trying new cameras, putting in the hard work, great. But then don't go out and put a book.
Yeah,
for sale.
Which is what he did, and it was like there was like the photo of a elephant, the famed photo of an elephant,
like out of focus.
That is like completely in shadow, so you can't. And then there was like, and then the caption was like, elephants, so beautiful to look at, but so hard to see, so beautiful to look at, but so hard to photograph. That was like the caption, But there's this, this is like, and I think that this is why Brooklyn gets so much attention, is that he's kind of like a parody of a nepo baby. Like, that's his job, is being a parody of a nepo baby, because there's this TikTok guy who goes up, I think he's in LA, and he'll go up to people who are driving like really sick, fancy cars, and then he'll go up to them and be like, oh, hey, I love your car, what do you do?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you saw the video, but he went up to Brooklyn and was like, hey, I love your car, what do you do? And Brooklyn was like, oh, I'm a chef. And meanwhile, he's driving like this crazy, tricked out like sports car. That's definitely like David Beckham's car, like, or a car that is paid for by David Beckham. And then he was like, then the guy was like, oh, what, I don't think the guy knew that it was Brooklyn Beckham, but he asked Brooklyn, he was like, well, what is your advice to any aspiring chefs out there? And he's like, oh, just follow your passion. And it's like, if you're a line cook at a restaurant being like abused and like put through like the ringer at your job, and then Brooklyn Beckham's just like, I'm a chef driving this fancy car, like, follow your passion. Like, I would feel homicidal if that, like, in that moment, because it's like, I would feel like homicidal in that moment, because that's just so frustrating.
That's insane.
Okay.
I'll let you do one more.
Yeah. So my next bad nepo baby is Olivia Jade.
Really? I had a feeling someone was going to pick her. Someone being, out of the two of us, you, I guess.
Yes. Because, I think, again, I think these, like, you were talking about, like, what even makes a nepo baby bad? Like, what's a bad nepo baby? What does the bottom tier nepo baby look like? And I think for me, the bottom tier nepo baby is kind of, like, tacky, or sort of embodies the sort of worst elements of nepo babies that people don't like, whereas the top is like, people use their connections as vehicles to nurture and grow their actual talent about careers they're serious about. And like the bottom is like, I think people who are like, I'm rich, I'm pretty, let me like capitalize on that, and just sort of like not have any real respect for like where I'm from. And
I have to disagree.
Really?
I was an OG fan of Olivia Jade.
Oh, really?
Before all of this happened, like, I followed her on YouTube. And then after it happening, I mean, now she, like, does bring it up. Like,
Yeah.
not the, like, all the other stuff. But, like, she does joke about the fact that, like, oh, she has her palate, or, like, she's not going back to school. Like, she'll respond to people's comments on TikToks. And I think the one thing, like, there was a trend on TikTok, because she used to do, like, these luxury hauls, or whatever, like, Christmas hauls, or whatever. And she, like, had to comment on it saying, like, you guys, it's never gonna come back. Like, I'm never gonna do that because of, like, XYZ, I realized. And honestly, I think, like, there's more said in that than everyone else who hasn't even acknowledged the fact that they're a nepo baby. Do I think she, like, benefited from it and, like, did it blow up? Yeah. But I don't think that was, like, 100% her choice.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'll say that was fair is she did always, like, she seemed very convinced about, like, I'm not going to school.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not doing
and
that.
then it was her parents basically being like...
I think there's a case to be made, like, you know what? I'm going to scratch Olivia Jade, and I'll put in Chet Hanks. I'll scratch Olivia Jade, I'll put in Chet Hanks. Olivia Jade is off the bottom list.
Olivia.
You've convinced me. Chet Hanks, who would just be a really cringe, broke rapper if his dad wasn't Tom Hanks. Because if you don't know, Chet Hanks went on the red carpet in an inexplicable patois accent.
Oh my gosh, wait, I didn't know this, but this reminds me of Zach Bia. Like, why is he famous?
Yeah. There's a lot of people, and no, because people are like obsessed with Chet Hanks in part because they're like, how did Chet Hanks come from Tom Hanks, America's dad? Like, how did America's dad produce like this guy? And if you have ever seen, he had this fitness app, and if you haven't seen his interview with Z-Way, which I feel like I want to show you like before you go to bed tonight, but like it is the craziest. It is like, he's like, yeah, you get fitness advice from me and how to look like me, and I'm like, I'm figuring, I want to share what I learned with everyone else. And it's like, you get, pep talks from me, which is so basically like Chet Hanks hypes you up. Like,
Chet Hanks is a motivational speaker.
When you like look at the interview, it's just very clear it's like scam central. So actually, I will, Chet Hanks.
Okay, my last nepo baby that's at the bottom is Prince William.
Oh my god, that's a good one. Because he is like the apex nepo baby.
Exactly. He is first in line for the monarchy after King Charles. And there's all of these suspicions, especially with everything going on around Prince Harry and Meghan, about how William was abusive and never stood up for his brother. And that's also why Prince Harry's book is called Spare, because he was always referred to as the spare child, as William was always going to be the heir to the throne. And he's also just bald and just not, I just don't really know what he's... I'm sure that he's doing great work in some ways to society, but...
Well, they do... I'm sorry, but they do a lot of work to solve problems that, they create, you know what I mean? Solving poverty or something, and meanwhile they're living in palaces on taxpayer money. I don't know. Also, I not to bash Harry, but I was reading critiques of his book about Spare, where he was like, we're doing some kind of charity work in Africa, and and he was talking about all the people in need and in Africa or whatever, and it's like, Africa did kind of get that way in part because of British colonialism, right? And you did do the slave trade and a bunch of stuff like that. So it's it kind of does sort of feel like, oh, now we created problems and now we're swooping in to be oh, now we're saving you.
Yeah,
from
well,
them,
it's white savior complex.
It is, very much that way. So that is a very, very good.
Thank you. Not to hate on the monarchy, I'd still like to be a British citizen.
I hate on the monarchy. I'm an American. It's our thing. It's no monarchy. But speaking of not monarchies, but dynasties and empires, my last one is Kendall Jenner.
Oh, I'm actually shocked we haven't really talked about the Kardashian or Jenner clan.
Yeah, no, I think you're destined to do it. And you know why what makes me kind of incensed me about Kendall Jenner, I forget whether she or not she has said something kind of obtuse about nepo babies. I'm sure I would bet money that she has, not a lot, but $5. But there's these videos of it's Kendall Jenner being a pick-me, right? And it's all about how she was a tomboy when she was growing up, and she was I didn't even care about modeling, and
well, you even see it there, as someone who has watched Keeping Up with the Kardashians, there's an episode where Kim takes her to New York and tries to get her into runway walking, just learning how to runway walk and being more confident in that, because she was only doing kind of
catalog,
not Kendall Jenner doing catalog, no. Yeah. She was only doing photos and editorials. And so, and you basically see Kendall kind of having this little temper tantrum about how she doesn't want to walk. And then a year later, and now a couple years later, was one of the top runway models.
Yeah. And
I think that 1 year she was one of the highest paid runway models.
Oh, I think she is the highest paid. And she said something about how being a Kardashian was actually hindered her, and made it harder for her.
We've covered some of this in some of the previous statement piece episodes, but just having notoriety and fame and people knowing who you are carries you so far, especially in modeling.
Yeah.
And that's something that she was almost also born into. She was on Keeping Up with the Kardashians as less than 10 years old, and that followed her through life, and the whole world knows who that family is.
Yeah, and it's not like her parents weren't well connected. I mean, her,
super well connected.
Caitlyn Jenner was a very famous athlete. You know, Kris Jenner was deeply connected. Like, she knew OJ and his late wife, Nicole Simpson. And that is also, like, they were at a certain level of society. And, you know.
All right. So I guess this is a good place to wrap it up. Sophie, what are your last thoughts on Nepo babies?
I was thinking about how last night I was scrolling through TikTok, basically exclusively watching TikToks roasting Brooklyn Beckham, watching him describe how to make a gin and tonic like 45 times, and then watching people roast that just as many times. And, you know, it kind of did hit me, especially as I was doing research for this episode, about how big the press is in, like, shaping who we discuss and who's, like, kind of pushed to the front of, you know, culture and of fashion and the fashion world. And it's like, you know, I think about, like, my own part in, you know, boosting Nepo babies, because, you know, I think a lot of people are drawn to Nepo babies, their, like, Instagrams, their socials, because we all kind of want to see what it's like to be part of, you know, a celebrity family.
Yeah, you want to see what's going on the inside.
Yeah, and then I think that it's like, let me wait till you. And so, like, yeah, I think that it's, like, also, if we want to, you know, curb Nepo babies, it's also our responsibility to not watch Nepo babies, like, not give them the attention. Like, that is a small part that, like, the public can play in not boosting these people. But again, you know, I don't think that Nepo babies are inherently bad. Like I said, like, they're Nepo babies that are very talented and who, again, like, use their connections and but are also, like, very serious about cultivating, you know, their art and their skill, and that's perfectly fine. I actually wish Nepo babies would stop seeing this discussion as, like, a constant personal attack, and just start thinking about it more systemically, because it seems like that's the whole issue, is that that's what they can't do, right?
I completely agree. I think after my research, one, I was shocked by kind of how far it goes, and I really don't think it's going anywhere. Nepo babies are always going to be present. It's been happening for literally the last century. It's going to be happening, I'm sure, for the next few. As much as we like to, or want to, in America, democratize things, I don't know if 100% we're going to move in that direction.
Yeah.
And that's just based off of my own reflections on where society is. But I agree with you. Like, I think the main thing that people have an issue with is that no one's being honest, and no one's just no one is just accepting the fact that that is who they are.
Yeah. You know, I think the Nepo babies are, again, like, a symptom or a kind of a product of a very bad system, and a classist system, and it's like the classism is really what you need to attack, not just the Nepo babies.
Well, I couldn't have said it better myself, Sophie.
Okay.
Thank you for this great discussion. If any of your listeners out there have anything else to add to the discussion, we'd love to hear. Comment, like, subscribe, all of the above.
Yeah.
We have many different platforms in which you can also get in contact with us. We would love to hear everyone's thoughts.
Yeah.
But thank you for listening.
Bye.